would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which our four Australian campuses stand and pay our respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. Okay. So Tony will talk for 75 minutes and we will have 15 minutes for Q&A. So if you have some questions, urgent questions, you can just ask either in the chat box or you can simply ask. Otherwise, you can also ask at the end of the talk. Okay. So Tony, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen. All right. So thank you very much for inviting me here. This is a paper we've been working on for a very long time. I actually just checked my job box, and the first date is like 4 years ago. We started with an entirely different model, and we changed the model, and until most recently, we finally think that the information design approach can actually combine everything together and carry our idea very smoothly. So this is actually the first time I presented. Your comments are most welcome. So we're interested in this data-empowered online platforms, right? So if you think about who, so we talk about, people have been talking about big data, but if you think about who has the big data, those online platforms such as Amazon are one of them, right? So here is a news that says that even Google wants to get Amazon's data. So we want to understand how the advancement of data analytics or the growing availability of data, how do these impact the revenue engines of online platforms? So there are two main revenue engines. One is a sales commission, the other is advertising revenue. So I'm going to look at each one of them. So let's first look at the advertising. So actually, if you just search how do those retail platforms use big data, Google will tell you that they use this data to personalize recommendations to their customers. And in terms of the numbers, you can see for e-commerce platforms, recommendation accounts for a significant proportion of the fraction of the revenue. And for streaming services, these numbers even higher. And also, so this is a book, A Prediction Machine by Joshua Gans and Aviv Goldfarb and so on. So they are arguing that as these recommendation algorithms getting more and more accurate, the whole business model of Amazon can change from a shop then ship to a ship then shop. What does it mean is that in the ship then shop model, Amazon can accurately anticipate their customers' needs and ship the products directly to customers before they place an order. And then what the customers need to do is only to return those ones they don't like. So this is basically if you push the product recommendation to the extreme. Right, so this business model have been adopted by some fashion subscription boxes I show you here. So this is one side. It's about when there's a lot of data, what the online platforms can utilize this data to improve their match and therefore improve the commission of the platform. On the other hand, about the advertising of online platforms. So these are all the news about why Google should worry about Amazon as the biggest competitor in the advertising industry. Again, if we are looking at the numbers, now Alibaba essentially is also an online platform in China, and Amazon are now the third and fourth largest advertising platforms, trading only after Google and Facebook. So then if you think about how these improved data analytics and so how do these influence the sponsored ads on online platforms? Well, it is all about targeting, right? So if Amazon has a lot of data about their consumers, then they can allow their sellers or advertisers to target their ads according to these customers' specific characteristics or interests. And so this is called an interest-based ads on Amazon. All right, so I think I have motivated a lot by the standard of economics talk. That's maybe too much. Anyway, so based on these motivations, here comes our research question, right? So we talk about there's personalized product recommendation, and there's also targeted advertising. So are they two standalone trends, or there's some inherent trade-off between them? Sorry, I didn't keep track of the chat. If you have any question, maybe it's better you can just ask here.
Yep, currently there's no question.
Yeah, I just checked briefly. Yes, thank you. Okay, so by understanding this question, then we may be able to say a little bit about what is the optimal way to do it, right? So you have these two revenue engines, sales commission and advertising revenue. How does an online platform optimally balance them? And lastly, by understanding this question, we can say a little bit about how much an online platform is expected to gain from collecting and analyzing customer data, which usually involves some investment. And the perspective we take to answer these questions is that it's a public information design approach. So basically, the main idea of the paper is that the platform is going to design an information environment in a flexible way. And publicly, you can think about this as a recommendation to both sides of the market. And this recommendation on the consumer side, it basically is a personalized product recommendation. Think about when the platform recommends some product to the consumers. When consumers observe these recommendations, essentially consumers infer some relevant information about the match, right? So in the equilibrium, consumer when they see a recommendation, they will infer what is the probability of a match for this product. Okay, so therefore, so on the consumer side, the platform's information design will be in the form of a product recommendation, and this will guide consumer search. On the seller side, it will be a targeted advertising, right? So if you think about, just to give you an example, the platforms know a lot about its customers, but whether the platform wants to reveal all this information to the sellers for targeting, that's another question, right? So for example, let's talk about, let's say, sport category, sport goods category. Should the platform Amazon allow Nike and Adidas to target customers who like sports, or you can reveal more granular information to allow Nike and Adidas to target customers who like tennis, or even more granular information, those customers who like tennis and have watched some particular movies about tennis and so on, right? So this is the information disclosure on the seller side that is in the form of a targeted advertising. So essentially, the platform's information design on the seller side is going to influence sellers' ad competition. Okay, so essentially, This you can think about this is like a two-sided public information disclosure. Or if you're taking another perspective, you can think about both personalized product recommendation and targeted advertising are about monetizing prominence on a platform, right? So by recommending a product to a consumer, essentially this product is going to take the prominent position, and also by allowing sellers to make targeted advertising, the platform is going to place this seller on a prominent position, right? So there are two ways to monetize this prominence, and what is the optimal way? So that's a question and the research perspective we take. And when I read those information design papers, I usually have this, maybe because of my being in the marketing department, we care more about the practical relevance. So I usually have this problem about this commitment assumption, but I feel for our paper, this commitment assumption is a little bit more natural because the recommendation algorithms are automated, and you can think about the platform does not exactly know the match or does not necessarily need to know the match when they are designing this algorithm. They only need to know the distribution of consumers' match values in the market. It does not need to know a specific consumer's match value when they are designing this algorithm. And therefore, you can argue that they do not know the particular match value, and therefore they have this commitment power when they are designing this information disclosure. So here's a preview of the results. I've talked about this one already. So we're going to provide a uniform framework for understanding product recommendation and targeted advertising on an online platform. We're going to show that by supplying more information will improve match efficiency. Higher match efficiency means a higher sales commission. But at the same time, it will reduce the seller's incentives to advertise, and therefore it will lower the advertising revenue. And the optimal design will entail limiting consumer search. So we'll see that essentially under the optimal design, consumer only search one seller. And the optimal design will entail mixing the matched product with a long tail of unmatched products for recommendation. So this immediately means there is some social inefficiency because from a social planner's perspective, you always want to maximize the match efficiency. But our results show that from the platform's perspective, even though they have a perfect match, the perfect information about match, they don't want to implement the perfect match between consumers and sellers. So the paper is related to a couple stream of research. Obviously, the information design. We're using Kemanica and Ganskau's framework, but here the new complication is that we have multiple kinds of receivers. So we have the platform is the sender who send out the information, and both the consumers and the sellers, so both sides of the platform, they're receivers. And moreover, there's some communication among receivers. Consumers need to search for information, and the sellers will communicate this information through advertising. It is related to search theory. Essentially, we have a Walensky framework. So that is a search market with differentiated sellers. But here you'll see we have a particular kind of model where our products become correlated. While in Wolinski, it is the products are independent, and therefore Wiseman's Pandora rule will exactly apply to Wolinski's framework, but will not apply to our framework. Okay, so this is related to the position auction literature, but here we're not concerned about Google, or we're more concerned about Amazon, where essentially the platform itself not only derive advertising revenue, but also sales commission. And also the auction itself will be influenced by the information design. So we'll see. So because it's a targeted advertising, it's not the end targeted advertising. The last one, it is related to papers talking about targeting in the advertising market. The big difference here is that targeting in our setting is endogenously optimized by the platform through information design, while in previous literature, they've been talking about more as an exogenous feature. Okay, so let me, any question? Otherwise, I'm going to introduce the model. All right, so we have a monopolistic platform who charges a commission rate alpha that is between 0 and 1 for any transaction. So here alpha is exogenous. So because we only consider a monopolistic platform, if you endogenize it in our framework, alpha will be equal to 1. Okay. Of course, you can have a more meaningful endogenous commission rate if you consider competition among platforms. But for the purpose of this paper, we just keep it exogenous. There are n numbers of sellers. N must be greater or equal to 3. So you will see the reason exactly later. They have 0 production cost. There are I numbers of consumers. They are essentially homogeneous. So essentially, we only need to consider one representative consumer. But the consumers are exactly, but the consumers can be exposed heterogeneous. So after they know, essentially their match value could realize to be different for different consumers. So I like Adidas and she likes Nike. But exactly we are the same. So this is the strongest assumption in this paper. I also feel this is one innovation we bring to the literature. We're going to assume that one and only one seller matches with each consumer. Okay, so this means that the seller's match values are not independent for each consumer. Because if I know seller A is a match, then seller B definitely is not a match. Okay, so we do have an extension on IID match values among sellers. I'm still working on it. So I cannot tell you right now how strong this assumption would be until I have solved that model. But I feel there's some beauty of this model, so you will see later. The consumer is going to have a elastic demand function DP for the matched seller. For the unmatched seller, it's going to be 0. So you may ask why you have this elastic demand. Why not just say inelastic demand? Why not just say consumer has a valuation of V for the matched and 0 for the unmatched? So I will explain this later, but essentially if that's the case, then the consumer don't want to search because of the diamond paradox. So here we want to avoid the diamond paradox. So we just introduce some elasticity in the demand. Okay. Consumer has an outside option of not buying anything. which is normalized as 0. So you can think about this as not participating in the platform. All sellers are exactly the same. So consumers have the same prior belief of the match value for each seller. So this is the model setting for the two-sided for the market. And then I will talk about the information design part. The state of the world is essentially for each consumer, which seller is the matched seller, right? So this NI is just the index of matched seller for consumer I. Okay, so the platform now wants to design information, an information structure pi that maps the state of the world to a signal. And the sellers and consumers observe both this information structure pi and a signal realization. So you can, how they can observe this pi? Well, you can think about consumers have repeated interactions on this platform, right? So if you use Taobao, which is a Chinese version of Amazon, you'll find that it is all about recommendation. So there is no organic ranking on Taobao at all. Unlike Amazon. Yes, any question? Oh, okay. I have some question. Is search directly here or is it random? It's a directed search. So you'll see, because ex-ante consumers have the same prior belief, but exposed after the platform reveals some information according to the structure, some sellers are more likely to be a match than others, and therefore consumers will want to check out those sellers with a higher voltage first. If random, how do they escape diamond paradox? Right, they will not escape the diamond paradox. Actually, we are utilizing diamond paradox to simplify the pricing part of our paper. So this is one thing we've thought about for a very long time. Because if you're going to think about a platform is going to design the information while the seller is doing both pricing and advertising decision, and consumers going to search, this will be too complicated. So we just shut down the pricing using a diamond paradox. You will see the equilibrium price is always at the monopoly level. So then this gives us, we will focus on the targeting and advertising part. So the prices are endogenous, but it's sort of in a trivial way by diamond paradox. Okay, so just give you two examples. This will background noise. Can I mute everyone? Maybe you can help me mute. Can you help me mute everyone?
Yeah, I was trying to mute him, but yeah, I think he's not. Yeah.
Oh, it's fine now. Okay. So just two examples of this. A full information will be just the platform will just reveal the signal as the state of the world, right? So that would be a full information. So then you can think about this is like recommending the perfect match seller to each consumer. And on the seller side, essentially we allow the seller to target those consumers that are exactly like you, right? So suppose Amazon has a perfect information, then Amazon can say, this is Adidas customer and this is Nike's customer. So instead of allow Adidas and Nike to target on customers like sports, I can allow them to target customers like Adidas and customers like Nike, right? So that's the interpretation of perfect match as a perfect information. Sorry. On the other hand, in the other extreme, you can have a information no information at all. Then essentially means that regardless of the state of the world, I just reveal some signal. Right? So the signal has nothing to do with the state of the world. This basically, if you interpret this in terms of product recommendation, it basically means that I recommend products randomly. Or from the seller side, essentially, I do not reveal any information for the seller to target. The sellers can only, there's no information. So it's essentially an targeted advertising. Okay. So actually, we're going to analyze these two cases first, just to give us a general idea about the trade-off behind. And then I will present the optimal design of the information structure. Okay, so this is still a slide on model. Just to clarify, just to specify the consumer search and seller advertising a little bit more. So consumers conduct sequential search for both match values and prices. So therefore, it's like Wolinski. They do not observe price nor match values before they search, and they observe it upon visiting a seller. Search cost is positive. There is a prominent position with zero search cost. Okay. And for this prominent position, the platform will hold a second price auction. We want to adopt a more general, more general mechanism design approach, but we find it very complicated. So right now, this is exogenously given. So it's a second price auction. I do not know whether the result will change if we switch to a, for example, first price auction. Okay. The auction is individualized. It means that the seller N will set a price Pn. The price is not individualized. It's there's no price discrimination here, but the advertising is. So the advertising bid Bn is for a particular consumer. This is the most general way you can think about. So for example, if the platform allow Adidas and Nike to target those customers who like tennis, then essentially you have a group of customers, a group of consumers who all have the same information. Then the seller is going to be the same for each one of them. Essentially, you can group them together, or you separate them and submit each bid for each consumer, or you submit a bid for this group of consumers. Is exactly the same thing. Okay, just to summarize the model. So we have, this is the timeline of the model. The platform commits to an information structure pi, and then there's a signal S realized according to pi. The sellers and consumers observe the platform's choice of pi and the signal S, and then they decide their price and their bid for each consumer. And then the consumer observe who is taking the prominent position, and then they can visit this prominent seller freely, and then they decide whether they should continue their search. If they continue, where should they buy? So that's a timeline. So next, I'm going to present some results on the equilibrium price and search. And then I will look at two extreme cases, and finally, I will present the optimal information design. So first, due to diamond paradox, the equilibrium price is always at the monopoly level. The reason is the following, right? So even though we have heterogeneous sellers, but the heterogeneity comes in a special manner that is only 0 or positive. And this sort of heterogeneity actually does not solve Diamond paradox. Because if you think about a seller, I don't want to lower price to attract consumers to visit me because they cannot observe my price. So I cannot attract anyone. Also, for those who are matched, I don't want to lower price either because they cannot find match on anybody else. So I'm like the monopoly. So I should charge a monopoly price. So that's a basic intuition, very simple argument. Okay, so this helps us a lot. Simplify the pricing part. Essentially, we shut down the pricing part. Okay. Now, some useful notations. Consumer surplus under the monopoly price will be U. You can calculate by this. And the seller's profit will be V. That's essentially the price times the demand under equilibrium. So we will find that essentially we just work with U and V later. We impose an assumption, the search cost is positive, but at the same time, it cannot be greater than U. Otherwise, no one wants to search. So, and then we prove this, right? So we show that the consumer, when they want to search, they will always search by the descending order of their posterior belief of the sellers. So remember, the sellers exactly they're the same, but now the platform reveals some information, right? After this information revelation, the consumers will update their belief about the match probability for each seller. And then they will have a posterior belief. The posterior belief could be different for different sellers. And essentially, we said that the consumer should search the ones with the higher match value first. If this is under a Wiseman's framework with independent products, this is obvious by the index rule. But here, because we have correlated products, so this is not obvious, but we can prove it. Okay, so now let's look at the two extreme cases. The first one is the full information. So suppose the platform just revealed the full information. In this case, all sellers will be 0 because by winning the prominent position does not give the seller actual benefit. So if I'm the match seller, the consumer will come to me anyway, so I don't need to take the prominent position. So therefore, there will always all be 0, but the match seller will win. Essentially, we need some tie-breaking rule because the platform has the information. Remember here, this is a full information environment. Under this environment, the platform knows which is the matched seller, and the platform will prefer the matched seller to win. So therefore, if you show that this is the optimal tie-breaking rule for the platform to let the matched seller win. When the matched seller win, it will have this benefit of V, but the platform will take a share of alpha. So the seller has the remaining value of 1 minus alpha times V. Now, consumers do not search because the matched seller will win and take the prominent position. So therefore, the consumer will just buy from the prominent seller. And therefore, they expect a surplus of U. And the platform's revenue comes only from commission. So that's alpha times V times the number of consumers is I. Okay, so very straightforward. It is interesting to notice that in this case, we essentially, this full information design actually corresponds to a pure recommendation strategy. There's no advertising at all. The platform only uses recommendation because here the auction essentially becomes muted. The matched seller win and there's everyone bid 0. Essentially, the auction becomes muted. So this outcome essentially becomes equivalent to a market where the platform does not hold any auction at all, but only use product recommendation. So therefore, this is a full information case of our general framework corresponds to this specific case where a platform does not hold any auction at all, but only use recommendation. Okay. Now, for the no information case, it's a little bit more complicated. So I need a llama to help me first before I present the market equilibrium. This llama is about how consumers search, right? So it's the following. If C is very, very small, then the consumer will search everybody until they find a match. Otherwise, if the C is not that small, the consumer will never search beyond the advertised seller. Okay, so this result really comes from our setting of a correlated product. Think about when a consumer starts to search, and if she finds the first seller is not a match, the consumer actually becomes more optimistic because the match has to be among the remaining sellers. This gives consumer higher incentive to continue search, right? Because now the match probability becomes higher. So therefore, essentially, when there's under this uninformative environment, the consumer either does not search at all, or they search until they find a match. So that's the consumer's optimal search strategy. Now, given these, we can characterize the market equilibrium under no information. Suppose the platform does not reveal any information, then if the search cost is really small, the consumer will always search to find the matched seller. Then the seller has no incentive to beat again. So everyone will be zero because if I'm the match, I will be found anyway. I don't need to take the prominent position. But in this case, because the platform commits to not use any information, right? This is the uninformative environment. Therefore, the platform cannot select the matched seller to win. The platform can only implement. This is the only feasible tie-breaking rule. And obviously, then it becomes the optimal tie-breaking rule because this is the only feasible tie-breaking rule. A random seller will win, but the match outcome will be exactly the same. Everybody will get matched because the consumer is going to search. So this is very straightforward, right? So if I search cost is really low, I'm going to search to find a match. Then everyone will get search, of course, get matched, of course. So I think this is a more interesting case, especially when you consider a typical setting in practice where there are usually many, many sellers in the platform. The N is large. So this should be very small. So this should be a more interesting case. In this case, the consumers do not want to search at all. If the platform does not reveal any information. So this is saying that in our model, the platform really needs to help the consumer. Otherwise, the consumer is not going to search at all. Okay. So if the consumer not going to search at all, then for all the sellers, if they win, they get they have a chance of 1 over n to be the match. Because there's no information in this environment, the seller does not know whether they're a match or not. So they have an expectation of 1 over n to be a match. If they match, they earn this. And a random seller will win, and the competition is driving the seller's profit to be 0. Because everyone be the same. The consumer will purchase the advertised product. The consumer does not want to search at all. if this product is a match. Otherwise, the consumer will just exit the market, and therefore the consumer surplus will be U divided by N. That is essentially it's a U times the match probability. The platform will obtain the profit from this. This is a commission. Okay, the consumer has a 1/n to be matched. Upon being matched, this is a commission. This is the advertising revenue coming from here. So if you add these two together, it's just a 1 IV divided by N. Okay, so so that's the no information equilibrium. And if you look at this one, this will be just corresponds to a sponsored and targeted ads. Actually, I think like 1 or 2 years ago, Amazon was doing this. The advertising on Amazon was not targeted. Amazon only started targeted advertising like 1 or 2 years ago. Okay, so that will correspond to this special case. There's no, but there's no recommendation. There's only sponsored ads. Okay, so the proposition 3 just compare these 2 extreme cases. Again, this is an interesting case. For the other case, the 2 cases will be exactly the same. The platform will be indifferent between full information and no information. But when the search cost is not minimum, then we have this very simple condition. When alpha times n, alpha is a commission rate, n is the number of sellers in the market. When alpha n times n is greater than 1, the platform will prefer full information. Otherwise, the platform will prefer no information. This can be seen from here, right? So under no information, the platform's profit is IV divided by N. Under full information is alpha times IV. So it's just a comparison between this and this. Now, this basically illustrates the trade-off between a match efficiency and surplus extraction for the platform. By supplying more information, obviously, the platform gets better in terms of the commission because the match efficiency is now higher. But if you supply a lot of information, it means that the sellers will become exposed, very differentiated, right? The matched seller will exactly know I'm the matched guy, so I don't need to advertise. And the unmatched sellers also know I have no chance, so therefore I don't want to advertise either. So therefore, if you reveal a lot of information, the sellers just become too differentiated, exposed, and therefore they don't want to advertise. And therefore, there's not so much advertising dollars for the platform. And therefore, this trade-off really depends on how many sellers are in the market and what is the commission rate. Okay, so let me just briefly check the time. Okay, I still have like half an hour, right? So any questions so far? Otherwise, I'm going to talk about the optimal design.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So the search rule is completely determined by those exogenous parameters, right? So U and N.
Yes.
So how consumer search does not depend at all by the policy used by the platform?
No, because the platform can induce a general posterior belief. So that's exactly on this slide, actually.
Okay. Yep.
You are going to see that, right? So let's consider. So if you still have this question, remind me after this slide.
Okay.
So if you consider, let's just consider one representative consumer. Now, this consumer observed the pie and also the signal, and therefore, based on this, the consumer can do a base update, right? So, and then he will form a posterior belief for the seller. So, And just to simplify the notation, we just, and without loss of generality, we just assume that the posterior belief is in this descending order. So the seller one is most likely to be a match, and so on. Now, the platform's information design problem becomes the following, right? So I want to choose the platform is actually choosing pi and s, but this is a common technique, right? So this is a Kamenika and Ganskau's paper. Essentially, you translate this decision on pi and s into a decision on the posterior belief. And later you will verify that you can implement this posterior belief mu by a appropriate pi and s. So essentially you can think about the platform is exactly designing the posterior belief mu. So I'm just using pi mu to denote the platform's profit function. So the following couple slides, were just all about this pi mu, how we can write down the pi mu so that we can solve the platform's problem. And this is from here. And also, this basically comes from the base rule, right? So you have to have the expectation of the posterior belief equal to the prior belief. So essentially, intuitively, there's only one matched seller. Then therefore, the summation of these must be equal to 1. Okay, so why does the platform's policy will influence how consumers search? Because the platform will determine the posterior belief, and the consumer, obviously, their search decision were based on their belief. So therefore, essentially, the platform's using information design to guide consumer search. Okay. Okay, so the following couple slides, I'm going to look at how we write down this, how we solve this problem. We're going to solve this problem. So I want to give you a little bit, just the following couple slides will be a little bit more technical. So to solve this problem, we first introduce a concept called search length. So this search length will depend on consumers' belief, posterior belief mu. It is defined as the number of sellers that the consumer will visit given she has not found the match yet. So that means that essentially L is the maximum number of sellers the consumer will visit. Or to put it in an equivalent way, the consumers will search until either they have found a match or they have visited L number of sellers, okay? But of course, this L is a consumer's decision. So they decide how many sellers I should visit, given I have not found a match yet. So therefore, this L will depend on the posterior belief. And of course, they'll also depend on other model primitives, such as the search cost, and the number of sellers, and so on, right? So, but here, because this is a relevant one, so we just simplify the notation, okay? Now, given this, we can define the platform's revenue given the posterior belief mu and the search length L as the following. Okay, here the L, so when I was going through the slides, I feel maybe I should use a better notation. But here, this L does not depend on mu, okay? So this is, I'm saying, I'm given exogenously any arbitrary search length L. So think about this is how to interpret this profit function. This is the interpretation is like the following. The platform enforces the consumer search length to be L. Given this enforcement, what would be the platform's profit function? Okay. Now, by this definition, the platform's profit will be just equal to when this enforcement is not necessary, when the consumer actually choose their optimal search length. So here this L is defined as an arbitrary number. Okay, and here this is a function. Hopefully this is clear. Okay, so in the next slide, I'm going to write down these first, and then I want to calculate this, and then if I plug this into this, then I get the platform's profit function. So that's the logic is very straightforward.
Can I ask you another question?
Yes.
So first, the optimal stopping rule here is not static, right? Because the products are correlated in some sense. Because if you can only have one match.
Yes, it is. It is not static. Yes,
it's not static. And once you stop, so suppose I haven't searched any firm, and there are n firm left, and I decide to start search there. But then, if after my first search, I didn't find a match, but should I be more optimistic, right? So at that time, I become more optimistic.
Exactly.
So then you will basically exhaust all the alternatives.
That's the exact correct intuition. When mu1 is all equal.
Okay.
But now it is not equal because think about it, if this one is really close to 0, let's say after the second product, they become really close to 0, then at that job, before that job, I will cease searching. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Your intuition is totally correct if this is just equal. If that's the case, as I search, I become more and more optimistic upon unmatched product.
Yeah, okay, I see. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification. Okay, so just to continue. So the next step, I'm going to calculate this. This is basically, again, this is the platform given any arbitrary search length fixed. What should be the platform's profit? Now, think about now. This is I force the consumer to search L sellers if they have not found a match. Then this immediately means that seller 1 to L-1, they have no incentive to bid because they will always be searched if they are the match. If they are not the match, it doesn't matter. If they are the match, they will always be searched. So therefore, they don't need to take the prominent position. If I'm the match, I will get discovered by the consumer, and therefore I will bid 0. Okay, so this means that the seller L will actually be the winner because think about seller L. If seller L takes the L's position, then he's fine. If the seller L takes the prominent position, then he's fine. He will be discovered because he takes the prominent position. Otherwise, if he loses the prominent position, then seller L+1 will take the prominent position. And the consumer will search seller L+1 and 1 and until L-1, and then the consumer will stop. And then the seller L will never be examined by the consumer. So in that case, if the seller L loses, he will always get 0. But if he wins, then this is a match probability, right? So this is because this is a public information design. So therefore, the posterior belief is a public knowledge. Every players in this market have the same belief. Okay, so from the seller's perspective, this is my belief that I'm a match. Upon a match, this is a V. Sorry, it should not be I here. Maybe I can change this. There should not be an I here. Okay. All right, so if you know, and also For all other sellers after L, they will also beat this. But let's say seller N will beat 1 minus alpha times V and mu N for all N greater than L. But of course, the seller L will win. Now, if you write down the platform's profit will be, this is the commission fee I can get. So this is the commission rate times the number of consumers for each consumer upon a match. This is what I can get. And what is the match probability? Because the consumer will only check L sellers, so that's the match probability, right? Remember, they are not independent, so they are actually mutually exclusive. So when you calculate their match probability, actually the summation instead of doing like multiplication here. So you can think about either I match with the first or second or third or until N. So that's the match probability. Okay. And then what is the advertising revenue? The advertising revenue is that the seller L plus 1, it is because this is a second price auction. So then it will be seller L plus 1's bid. So that will be this one. Okay. So we have written down the profit function given L. Now, the platform's profit would be just which L should I enforce, right? I can enforce L equal to 1 or to N. Which L should I enforce? Where this one is defined as the following, right? So if I enforce L, this is my profit. But sorry, I should be not enforcement. It should be like which one I should induce. That would be that's the correct way to say it. Which one I should induce the search length? Should I induce L equal to 1 or to 2 or and so on? So if I want to induce L equal to L, then I need to guarantee that the consumer indeed consumer search length is indeed L given my information design and the rest. So that becomes our problem. Okay, so no questions so far. All right, so so what I'm going to do is the next is that I'm going to relax this one. I'm going to relax this constraint for now, because by analyzing this problem, it gives us a lot of intuition about how we can solve this original problem with this constraint. So by relaxing this constraint, this becomes an enforcement problem. That's like the platform enforce the consumer to take L. Then if the platform has this enforcement power, what would be the platform's optimal information design? After I analyze this, I will add this back. Then it will become, if the platform has no enforcement power but can only induce consumer to search, what would be the optimal information design? Okay, so let's work on this problem. Yes.
Tony, can I ask a question?
Yes.
You have in your notation, L is a function of mu, as if the number of sellers that a consumer will search depends only on the posterior mu. But
yes.
I'm not. I'm too slow to see that it only depends on mu. I thought it would also depend on which seller end up being the prominent seller. So I thought it depends on more than mu.
Ah, that's a good point. I think so. I agree. I think this is because this is essentially given the platform's information design, this becomes a complete information game. So that basically by observing who takes a prominent position does not give consumer actual information, because the consumer expects who will take the prominent position.
But when I'm, for example, when I'm one of the sellers,
right? If it's off the equilibrium path, right. If it's off equilibrium, let's say some sellers deviate from their bidding, and consumers will. I think it's still fine. So if some sellers deviate, then consumers expect this L seller will take the prominent position. But suppose in the off equilibrium path, some sellers deviate and another seller take this position, then the consumer will still follow this. Will these update consumers believe about mu? It will not, right? Because the deviation will not convey any information about mu, because the seller has no actual information about match value either. So therefore, maybe, but I think I should make it rigorous in the sense that.
The very important thing is that imagine that there are 100 sellers and L is 10. And so you, let's say you were expecting the 10th one to be prominent, and you're going to search the 10th one, and then you're going to search according to the posterior, search the 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 9. So let's say that's these 10 one you're going to have. So L equals to 10, given that particular posterior. Yes. Let's imagine an off equilibrium scenario. The 100th one won the auction. Now I'm going to search that one for free.
Yes.
Now I'm going to, instead of searching the 10th one for free, I'm going, so I'm going to have to you
may not search more. You may not.
Wouldn't I search up to the
Got it. Yes. So yes. I think you are right. Now I get it. I think you are right in the sense that yes, it should also depend on who take the prominent position. But then you can just write this one as L. Because from the platform's perspective, the platform knows that L will win. So it should have L here. So
I'm just thinking that in the auction, within the auction, when people are bidding,
yes,
they may not take the L as given. Of course, when the sellers are entering the auction, they take mu as given. They should not take L as given. It may be an advantage.
They can, if you don't allow consumers to make the choice. If you just enforce consumers to choose an L, then the sellers can. But when consumers are actively choosing the search lens, the sellers cannot. But isn't this is like the I see. So you are saying that here, maybe you cannot write it as the following way, because this is assumed as an enforcement. Then you can write as the following way, right? You can still write it as the following way. But when they are when they are choosing actively. So I think so far we're good. But how about the next slide I'm going to talk about? If they are choosing it actively, maybe I can think a little bit about it, but that's a great question. Yeah. So maybe I can think a little bit about it. But so far we're good. I think because right now we're essentially solving the problem where L is enforced. Okay. But when it is chosen, I think we should still be able. We're still fine. But yes, I need to think a little bit more about it. Thank you. That's a great comment. Okay, so next I'm going to relax this again. This is going to assume that this is enforced. So then the relaxed problem becomes the following. I just get rid of this one, right? So by working on this problem first, we can build some intuition. Okay, so the solution is very intuitive. Okay, so if alpha is greater than half, it means that I value more about commission than advertising dollars. Then I just want to maximize the commission. By maximizing commission, I put all the probability weights among the first L sellers because they will be visited and therefore this is the match probability. So if you look at here, this is the match probability. So I just want to maximize the match probability here. So maybe think about here we're essentially comparing alpha with minus alpha. So when alpha is greater than half, this is greater than this. So I want to maximize this. If 1 minus alpha is greater than alpha, then I want to maximize this, essentially, because this is an allocation problem, right? So we are subjecting to this constraint. There's this constraint. I can either allocate this one to these guys, or I can allocate them to this guy. So which one should I allocate? I'm just comparing the alpha. So that's very straightforward. If alpha is greater than half, I will allocate all of them to the first L sellers to maximize commission. Otherwise, I will try to maximize mu L plus 1. So that is my advertising revenue. But because of this constraint, there's this constraint. So the maximum value I can put on mu L plus 1 is 1 over L plus 1. Okay, so and they must be equal to give the maximum probability assignment to mu plus 1. Okay, so this goes back to our previously our trade-off, right? So that's the solution. So I'm going to use this solution to build up intuition for the original problem. Maybe let me just check the time.
You still have 5-6 minutes.
5 minutes, yeah. So let me skip this part. It's not very important anyway. So maybe just look at here. So if this is the case, then the L will be equal to 1 or L plus 1, right? If you allow consumer to search by themselves, then the consumer will either not search at all. So then therefore they just visit the prominent position, then the L mu will be equal to 1, or they will search until they find a match. So then L mu will be L plus 1. However, we have this constraint, which is that L mu must be equal to L. If I relax this constraint, I find that the L is either to 1 or L plus 1. So it means that this constraint must be binding, right? If it's not binding, then it will be violated. Then it means that this constraint must be binding under this case, for this case. I'm going to present I will skip the details how we get the optimal design, but after I present it, you will find it very intuitive. So I will present this lemma is about the optimal mu, which sets length equal to 1. So here, this is the 1 is the induced. Now this is the mu. Now suppose the platform wants to induce the search length equal to 1. What would be the platform's optimal design? Okay, so it will look like this. But how can we understand this? Well, we can understand this by comparing with the solution to the relaxed problem. So let's see, this is the first difference, right? So remember, this is a relaxed problem for general L, but here this is L equal to 1, so I just want to make this L equal to 1. If this is L equal to 1, then there will be mu1 equal to 1. This is exactly like this. And then you have mu2 equal to mu n equal to 0 will be like this, right? So then this will be exactly the same, but the difference will be on these conditions. So the first difference will be here when C is very small. When C is very small, the consumer will always search all the products. Then in this case, there is no advertising revenue because everyone will be searched. If everyone be searched, no one wants to advertise to take the prominent position. In that case, we just should implement the full information design. This is actually a full information design because I just reveal the one that is the matched one. Because the full information design already enables everyone to match and therefore maximize the commission. So that is here, if you enforce the L, when C is very small, the consumer will actually not choose L equal to 1, they will choose L equal to L plus 1. So this is the first difference. The second difference is here, right? So here, in the original design, in the exogenous design, this is equal to 1, but now this has to be a positive number. The reason is that I want to induce consumer to search only one seller. If this is the optimal design, then after finding the first one is not a match, the second one must be a match. So if mu3 equal to mu n, they are all equal to 0, then after finding the first one is not a match, the second one has to be a match. Then the consumer will definitely visit the second one. In this case, the consumer's search length will not be 1, it will be 2. So therefore, in order to preserve consumer search length to be 1, you have to assign some probability to others. So this generates the long tail, right? So you have to assign some probability to others. And finally, if you compare this and that will be also different. This is exactly because here, because of this design is changing, so therefore the threshold also become different. So this is the optimal design when the platform wants to induce the search length equal to 1. We also present the result where when they want to induce a search length equal to L, the only difference here is here. So for those products before L, we find that you should make the match probability decreasing in an exponential way, in a power way, essentially. The reason is that essentially you want to let the consumer just indifferent between searching and not searching. And this makes them just indifferent between searching and not searching and until they search the L. I don't have time to talk more about it. Maybe I just want to make through the most important message go through. So then we just compare this one, right? This becomes a question, which search length should the platform induce? Should I induce equal to 1 or should I induce equal to L? And we find that if C is very small, then it doesn't matter. Any posterior belief generate the same platform revenue. Otherwise, the optimal posterior belief will be achieved when the platform induce the search length equal to 1. And essentially it means that the platform wants to limit consumer search. The consumer will only visit the prominent seller. And we also verify that this belief mu star is Bayesian plausible. So you can find a pi and s to implement it. So here comes my last slide. Essentially, when you implement it, it's like the following, right? Suppose product N is the matched product. But when the platform is going to recommend, it will not recommend the matched product with probability 1. Essentially, it's not going to be a perfect information match. It will recommend product N and product N plus 1 with a high probability, but all other products with some probability. So that's the optimal information design generated by our model. How to understand this, right? So again, the platform revenue comes from commission and advertising revenue. Obviously, I want to recommend the matched product with some probability because this gives me a commission. But to maximize the advertising revenue, I want to make some other seller to compete with this matched seller. And I want to give the seller some incentive upon winning by assigning some match probability. So under this belief, this seller will believe if I win, I will have this probability to win. So therefore, it gives the seller incentive to upon winning. But these are all the threat if you are losing. By assigning probability to all other sellers, it means that if you lose, the consumer will not visit you. This gives you the incentive to beat high because what you are willing to beat is just a difference between winning and losing. I give you match probability and therefore you want to win. At the same time, I tell you, if you lose, you're going to be very nasty. You're going to earn nothing by assigning probability to other sellers. Okay, so just to summarize, we have a unified understanding of personalized recommendation and targeted advertising. And we find the optimal design entails limiting consumer search and mixing the matched product with a long tail of unmatched ones for recommendation. So thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Tony. Let's thank Tony for the talk. We still have, so we start like 5 minutes late, so we still have probably 10 minutes for Q&A. So if you have questions, please just unmute yourself and ask directly.
Hi, Tony, thank you very much for the presentation. Very interesting model setup. I'm wondering why you chose to have one prominent seller whose search the corresponding search cost is 0. What happens if you don't have that part? And you just fiddle with the posterior, how would the results change?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we have that one. Maybe this is like the path dependent because our last model has that feature. because we started with this, I think one feature I really like this model is that it generates the recommendation and sponsored advertising alone in these two extreme cases. That makes the paper more relevant to some extent because we replicate what being observed in reality. I feel like the information design framework, it is very hard in economics, but does not really take off in marketing. One of the reasons is that usually the implications are, the models are very elegant, and but usually the implications are sort of remote with what we observe in practice. So maybe that is because of my starting point that I want to replicate something that we observe in practice, so that this model is not, it is not just for the model itself, but it has some real life implications. By having this prominent position, we can generate these two at the extreme cases. If we don't have this prominent position at all, then what would the auction would be?
No, I realized that my question was silly because you are selling the prominent position, but
yeah.
So
no, it's not silly, but I think yeah, I know what you are tending toward. Yeah. So then the auction will be about something, right?
Yeah. Probably would be, I don't know, would it lead us back to position auctions such that the platform is selling posteriors? That is, I put a higher posterior on you if you bid higher.
Right. Could be, it could be. So I think that's one limitation of the paper is that we have some we have some exogenous setups, right? For example, like this one prominent position. So we haven't really come up with a more very general framework. So we indeed still have some structure or institutional details we impose. But thinking from a more like a mechanism design approach that could help, could make it more interesting. Yeah. But it's also a very hard problem. I've thought a little bit about it, but I find it very difficult.
And here, indeed, actually, if we are trying to model, for example, you are trying to model Amazon, but let's think about Google. So indeed, consumers actually do not quite know about themselves, but information about, for example, information about me, if you give it to me, I don't know how to read it, but if you give it to the sellers, they know a lot. They can learn whether I'm a likely consumer of their products. So so it looks so targeted advertising. In reality, it feels like it is information design in the sense of giving information of the clients to the sellers, so that the sellers can bid for the posterior of the, or in Google's case, that is the positions, to the extent that position do affect their posterior. They trust Google that the relevant things would be put on the top position. So, right. So it's almost like you reveal some information to the sellers, so that sellers know more about their match with this particular consumer, and then they bid for the posterior of the consumer through bidding the positions.
Yes, I agree. I think that's that could be another interesting question. Essentially, you are not talking about more like a platform. The information design will be more on the seller side, instead of have both bites on sellers and consumers. That could be a different setup, and that could be interesting too. So, so in this paper, we're essentially more about like a two sides public information disclosure. But you could just focus on more on one side, where you can think about consumers are more likely to be more naive, so they don't really take this information. They cannot digest this information, or so the impact of this information disclosure is more on seller side. Yeah. That
so
could
mapping your model to reality, how maybe I'm not familiar with how Amazon does things. Can I get a sense how, for example, here you do try to manipulate posterior of the buyer. How exactly this is implemented in practice, for example,
yes,
by
so,
Amazon?
Yeah, this could be, for example, on Amazon, on the consumer side, this could be just through product recommendation, right? So if you, through your interactions with Amazon, you will gradually know that upon seeing a recommendation, what it would be the real, what will be the true probability of a match.
So Amazon not only recommend one, which is corresponding to the prominent position in your model,
right.
And Amazon go beyond that, and also for the rest that are not recommended, Amazon also give a probability,
True.
something like that. Okay.
True, exactly. So that would be like if you introduce multiple positions and so we haven't been able to do that. Yeah, so that could be one disconnection of the model with Amazon, where we just have one position. Essentially, if you recommend, you can only recommend one product. The multiple positions have sort of been captured by these consumers being able to observe the information structure, the pie. Because consumer does not only observe the signal, which is more like just one product. By observing the pie, essentially the consumers have information about other products as well. So it's been sort of captured, but not in the exact way. I think this is, it is relevant in the sense that when I first started this project, our question is like, what will be the limit of advertising revenue from Amazon? Right? So will Amazon one day take over Google? And we show that indeed advertising will bring actual revenue to Amazon, even though at the cost of social efficiency, because without this advertising, actually, if everything is done by recommendation, actually Amazon will recommend the perfect match. But when we introduce this advertising, Amazon can earn higher profit by doing this, right? By doing this. And this will give Amazon actual advertising revenue, but at the cost of social efficiency.
Thank you.
Yeah, all right. I think I need to stop you there. So Tony still have 2 meetings after the talk. So thanks again for the wonderful talk. And I will see you all of you in the next seminar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, King Sao.
Thank you.